Our game is titled Fight for Fairness. The timeline takes place during the Fulton Bag and Cotton Mill strike, during a very tumultuous time. The workers will be fighting for better wages, working conditions, and living conditions. We wanted to start the game when the strike started so that the first day would still be exciting. The format of the game is structured to provide flexibility in how the players act. We included the strike leaders meeting so that they could revise their demands and bring a proposal to the mill management. They will either have to participate in negotiations between workers and management, or they will have to face the effects of the strike as a townsperson or visitor. After playing our game and engaging in the material, players will have a better understanding of the Fulton Bag strike. With this game, our goal is to teach players about historical events in an active fashion. Players will understand the dynamic between strikers and management during labor strife in the early 20th century. Workers need improvements to the quality of food and the houses. Mill workers lived in very modest housing. They had the option of living in the Fulton Bag housing, which also included a meal plan with decent food, but they did not want the company dictating their lives. This also reduces their privacy. Workers in Fulton Bag continually get sick, and they want sanitation conditions to improve. One of the main objectives for the workers in the game will be to gain better health conditions. This picture is an example of the houses around the Fulton Bag Mill. The houses are old, very close together, and beat down. Dr. Hall wanted the housing conditions fixed.
This is Jacob Elsis, the owner of Fulton Bag Mills. He opened the mill in 1872. Originally born in Germany, he later immigrated to the U.S. The strike began in May of 1914 and ended in May of 1915. In March of 1915, the U.S. Commissions on Industrial Relations visited Atlanta. Working conditions in the mill were very bad and run down. The mills were falling apart, as you can tell from this picture. There were many instances of workers getting limbs cut off and killed because of the dangerous machinery and conditions. Workers wanted better working conditions and pay to compensate. This is the tent town that was set up during the strike. People could not afford their houses anymore because of being on strike. They banded together and set up tents outside the mills and outside the towns. The union set up the tent towns, and then after the strike was over, they helped take the tents down and relocate the strikers to a more permanent home. These are women seamstresses outside a mill. Women were a crucial part of the strike because their pay was more important than a man's pay. They already had half the pay as men, so being on strike reduced wages even more. The addition of an African American seamstress caused a prior strike. This is an example of a hospital in the early 1900s. Dr. Hall may have worked in a place like this during his early days when he worked mostly with the middle to upper class. Toward the end of his career, he worked with the mill workers and visited town to town and mill to mill. He saw many infectious and contagious diseases.
Our game is formatted in a similar way to the Patterson game in that there are two main factions, the workers and the manufacturers. Each of these factions have competing agendas and need to make sure they get the best of the final deal. Along with these, there are several other factions who are also competing for the best things. The faction roles are defined in a similar way to the Patterson game, but the players have more choice in how they want to act. For example, union leaders and operatives who are dissatisfied with the current state of affairs can choose to jump ship and work for the manufacturers if they are unions and workers if they are operatives. The game will have 4 different sessions. Each session will correspond to a historical event that occurred during the strike. After each session, operatives can meet with the manufacturers so that their cover will not be compromised, and this goes for any other person whose cover is important. There are no victory conditions that require X amount of money in our game. Instead, every session, people have to pay for certain things, and at the end of every session, they lose money, depending on their faction. Like the Patterson game, if somebody loses all their money, they lose the game. Our game has more choices in how people can act compared to the Patterson game, because we felt the original game was too strict and it didn't give people enough freedom. For example, workers can choose not to strike in the very beginning of the game if they're able to come to terms with the manufacturers, and this goes for any other game session.
At the end of the game, each faction will have specific goals they need to accomplish in order to win the game. The owners want to minimize the concessions made to the workers because every inch they give takes more and more off of their profit margins. They also want to end the strike quickly, getting more workers back into the mill. The operatives are initially employed by the owners, so they will try to help the owners. They can sabotage the union's negotiations and report on union meetings to the owners. However, they can be bribed by workers to join their cause and return false information to management. If whichever faction they side with wins, they also win. The workers will have three main goals in mind: higher wages, lower hours, and better working conditions. They need to accomplish at least one of these goals, but the more they accomplish, the better. Female workers will have the added goal of equality in the mill. The strike takes a large toll on the workers, though, so they need to use resources wisely to survive. The labor union comes to Fulton in support of the workers. They fight on behalf of the workers and need to give them the upper hand over management. They also realize that the eyes of the nation are on Fulton, and a win in Fulton will produce similar results across the nation. The U.S. Commission on Industrial Relations is also watching, and their support is vital. The idea of our game is to place students in a town embroiled with strike in the early 1900s. They will see what it's like to have to win public opinion and win negotiations in a labor conflict. Also, they will understand how little resources workers had compared to owners, and how workers had to use those resources in the fight for fairness.